This is Ira Gorlick. And this is a short lecture on architecture innovation. What I'm going to talk about in this short lecture is mostly based on the work of Barbara Van Schewick, who is a professor of law at Stanford University Law School. She's also associate professor of electrical engineering and director of the Stanford Law School's Center for Internet and Societies. So she comes with a pretty nice resume. Van Schewick's research on economic, regulatory, and strategic implications of communication network bridges law, networking, and economics. So you can see why I like it here, because we're talking about economics. We'll talk a little about her stuff when we talk about in the law, and we'll talk a lot about her work in the technical section that I have on the internet. The work she's done has made her a leading expert on net neutrality. She actually is a huge supporter of net neutrality, so you need to take that into account. Remember, I talk about biases and recognize that that's her bias. And when you read her work, pretty much everything I'm going to be talking about for her comes from this book, the Internet Architecture and Innovation. It was published in 2012. And I think it's great. It's pretty technical, and I'll try to summarize it as much as possible here. Pretty much what she says is that just as the architecture of a house describes its basic inner structure, the architecture of complex systems describe the basic inner structure, its components, what they do, and how they interact to provide a system's functionality. This technical structure may have economic consequences. And when she says may have, I'm almost certain to say almost certainly has. So understanding the economic consequences of a technical structure of a thing is an important topic to study, which is why I'm going over it here. For example, understanding the technical structure of the financial markets is important to understand the optimum role of the community in the banking industry. And understanding the technical structure of the food production and distribution markets is important to understand the optimum role of the community in the food markets. Thus, understanding the technical structure of the internet is important to understand the optimum role of the community in net neutrality. This, by the way, is why I'm a relativist. I've said this a number of times, and this is another example of what supports my position as being a relativist. To believe that the same one set of rules applies to all markets in all situations is hard, for me, if not impossible, to justify. The optimum role of the community in the financial markets is different than the food production and distribution markets, and the optimum role of the community is different for computer software markets than water, sewer, and electricity markets. Another quote from Barbara, is traditional policymakers have used the law to bring about desired economic effects. Architecture may provide an alternative way of influencing economic systems. And this is critical to net neutrality. So, as I've said, I am not a big fan of the government mandating net neutrality. And that's because this would be a case of policymakers using the law, net neutrality rules, to bring about desired economic effects. Rather, I think we need to look at the architecture as a way of influencing economic systems. Policymakers, she says, may have to constrain the extent to which private actors can use architecture to further their economic interest. And this is very important because it goes to the whole notion of a good actor, bad actor, people pursuing their interess, and the idea that policymakers may have to constrain the extent to which private actors use the architecture. And this is important to understanding what is the community's role in managing economics or commerce. This is particularly relevant to net neutrality because of the extent to which the internet has permeated more and more commercial markets, and to the extent that just a handful of powerful actors, ISPs, Verizon, Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, can act in ways that favor just a handful of also powerful economic actors like Netflix and YouTube, at the expense of other actors. Therein lies the heart of the net neutrality discussion, in that, who gets to advantage or disadvantage one economic actor from another. I've talked about this under economic constraints, but I just want to go over it again. The economic system evolves as economic actors pursue their own interest within a set of constraints, and as they act to change those constraints. What's happening in net neutrality is that you have some ISPs like Verizon and AT&T attempting to change the constraints that they operate under. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about using the internet architecture as a model to put Hayek into the 21st century. So you can see what I've done here, or you'll see what I've done in a second, is I'm trying to combine some different fundamentals to demonstrate a different architecture.